Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, April 4th, 1990, the Arizona Senate votes to impeach Governor Evan Mecham. And if I can characterize the reaction of the people in Arizona, actually kind of across the political spectrum, in that moment, it was probably like, it's about freaking time that we got rid of this guy. So let's get right into it because this Mecham story is wild. The first governor to be removed from office at that point in about 60 years, and only one has been removed since. And his resume, as it were, of impeachable offenses was a real hit list of shady behavior. We've gotten a bunch of emails about him, and all of them mention another piece of shady behavior. So you should talk about this thing he did, and this thing he did, this thing, and they're all different and equally shady. So it is quite remarkable. Thank you to everyone who has written in, and I'm here to discuss Mecham's removal, as always, are Nicole Hemmer of Vanderbilt and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
You know how in baseball they talk about hitting for the cycle, and you just kind of do everything in one game? This guy hit for the political cycle of bad behavior. So I don't know where you want to start. Do you want to start with the racism or the corruption or the abuse of power?
I was like, racism for 200? That's not right.
Or do we want to start about why he got into office in the first place, which is its own kind of crazy scandal? What do we think here?
Well, let's start with how he got into office, because I do think that this is going to be a key theme in his removal as well. And I think it's important to set the stage that not that many people liked Mecham to begin with. He was somebody who had been kind of a perennial candidate for office. He was a millionaire. He was an auto dealer. He was a Republican. Auto dealers, for some reason, in the United States tend to be Republicans. And in 1986, he finally wins the race for governor in the most improbable set of primary and general elections. So he runs for the primary. He upsets somebody who had been the majority leader in the Senate. People were really surprised, but it was a really low turnout primary. So he sneaks past his opponent in the primary. And then in the general election, it's a three-way race. And it's a Democrat and a Democrat who becomes an independent. So the Democrats split the Democratic vote, and with 40%, Mecham slides into office.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the original emails we got flagging this story for us was from a listener named Sid, who basically said, this shows that, 10% of Arizonans elected, and then in Sid's estimation, but I think we can probably agree on this, he's like 10% of Arizonans elected an incompetent and racist and crooked governor. When we think about kind of low voter turnout and highly politicized moments, this is sometimes what you get.
Has consequences.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's the racism for me. So it's like one of the first things that he moves to do is to remove the Dr. Martin Luther King holiday. He starts to criticize it. He says that, the creation of this holiday was illegal. And when people call him out on it and basically say hey, this is really problematic, his response, and I just have to read it because it's so bad. He says, I've got black friends. I employ black people. I don't employ them because they're black. I employ them because they're the best people who applied for the cotton picking job. What? What?
Whoa.
I'm like, oh God. It's just,
all right, so we have to stop and break that down.
Yeah, because that's the trifecta there.
Okay. Again, that's, first of all, the common response is, I have black friends. That's some of my best friends
cover that base.
That's, yes.
But you know what? If he had stopped there, maybe that's fine. Yes. If he had stopped there, it's probably fine.
Maybe.
But then to use the turn of phrase,
I employed them. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, I was like, cotton picking. Of all of the metaphors, adjectives that you could use, cotton picking is not something you should be associating with black labor. So it just, it pretty much falls apart after that. But then he really starts to double down on other black slurs. He starts to talk about how he doesn't think calling black children pickaninnies is racist or a problem. He saw nothing wrong with that. And he cannot really dig himself out of this hole. And then, of course, the hole starts to expand into other kinds of corruptions and immoral behavior that just people have had enough. They get fed up and it's a very short amount of time before people are talking about getting rid of him.
Yeah, they start talking about it almost as soon as he's elected into office. But I mean, Kellie, when you say that he kept digging the hole bigger and bigger, in large part, as you read more and more of his story, it's just who he was. He was somebody who held a number of racist beliefs. He's a good reminder about how contentious the idea of a holiday for Martin Luther King Jr. was in the 1980s. Most people didn't try to repeal it, so he gets extra credit for that. But
we've touched on that before, but I want to do a proper episode on that.
Yeah.
I think people have memory hold the fact that there was active resistance. I mean, in his case, not just resistance, but he actually wanted to repeal it. But yeah, I mean, it's
No, and he also he makes anti-gay comments. He talks about how working women cause divorce because they work outside of the home. So he had a whole slate of pretty retrograde beliefs that many people shared. But all of those, and I don't actually think that the racism would have been enough to get him recalled from office or impeached. But man, does he layer it on the corruption front?
Well, let's do that, but then I want to come back to a little bit of this other stuff. But what is it that then he starts to layer on? He can't stop at using weird, antiquated slurs.
Yes,
he doesn't disclose a loan of $350,000 to his campaign, so he's involved in campaign finance shenanigans. He takes this money that he raised at his inaugural ball. It was something like $80,000 or something like that. And he just spends it on his automobile dealership. And when people are like, I don't think you can do that, he's like, I can totally do that. That money I can spend on anything. And so it wasn't just that he was corrupt. It was, again, that he's just like, yeah, that's my money. I get to do whatever I want with it. So I also think it's just that kind of like blatantness of his corruption that also helps to seal the deal.
But he also has a staff member who had someone basically threaten their lives. And then he tries to obstruct justice by getting involved in that investigation of the death threat of a member of his staff. And it's like, no, you can't get involved in this investigation. You can't obstruct justice. But that's exactly what he tried to do.
Yeah. And, he just starts to veto basically everything, even stuff from his, quote unquote, political allies. And so he's vetoing stuff. He's getting in fights with the Speaker of the House, who's also a Republican. It's just a sort of like acting with impunity kind of thing that we have seen from a lot of other politicians, and this self-dealing and just self-interest. I mean, he's acting really poorly, but also just not being strategic, and he's just pissing off everyone and anyone almost immediately. Oh, and then, of course, he's also fighting with the press. Very quickly he starts blaming the press and telling them that they're out to get him, and he starts isolating them. And so, it's just, I think we've unfortunately seen this script
so many times.
Yeah. What is it that they say? Never pick a fight with someone who buys ink by the barrel. Seems like he's not learned that lesson.
No.
And then, if we're just going to start layering in, like,
just keep going. Let's know
the classics of the genre. Paranoia too, right? And so then he starts to feel, he gets this like foxhole bunker mentality. There's this incident where he is convinced that people are spying on him. He thinks that there's listening devices in his office. He orders a staff member to go searching for these listening devices. The staff member is crawling across the like drop ceiling of his office, and it gives way and he falls through, and I think he breaks his leg. And it's just this like crazy stuff. There's also an incident. Yeah.
That's incredible.
You're used to hearing my voice on the world, bringing you interviews from around the globe.
And you hear me reporting environment and climate news. I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. We're now with you hosting The World Together. More global journalism with a fresh new sound.
Listen to The World on your local public radio station and wherever you find your podcasts.
The crazy thing about this impeachment is that it's not unanimous, but there's a significant portion of people that are voting against him that make this, that effectively kick him out of office. But like, I think it's all of those layered, I don't even know if you can call them missteps, like layered
bad acts,
poor behavior. Yeah, bad acts.
Crimes and
like everyone can, for their own reason, right? That's how you build a coalition, right? It's not just to get everyone on board with one reason. It's like there's enough reasons that everyone can pick their own, and it's 21-9. They vote to convict him. It's an obstruction charge eventually that becomes the thing that gets him called up before the Senate, and they dismiss the loan cover-up charge, and they bring off the obstruction charge, and they convict him 21-9, and he's moved from office. First governor to be impeached and removed from office in about 60 years. Any other thoughts on that moment? And then I want to ask some bigger questions about this guy.
One important thing about that moment is that there was a multitude of efforts being pursued in order to get this person out of office. It wasn't just that these procedures were happening in the state legislature, but there had actually been a recall petition put out almost as soon as he took office. It easily gets the 300,000 signatures. There's a recall election set for May 17th, and the House and the Senate are like, well, we could wait till May, or we could just throw the bastard out through impeachment, and that's what they end up doing.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
We should also have pointed out in the sort of growing both internal and nationwide pushback. I mean, this is also that incident where the NFL is going to have the Super Bowl in Arizona, and so and that often applies a huge amount of pressure. The NFL basically says we're going to cancel the Super Bowl in Arizona. That's like $200 million out the door. We've seen that a bunch of times. Even in the last few years, we see Disney fighting with Florida. We saw the NBA fighting with North Carolina over the bathrooms bill. So yes, I mean, that economic pressure is definitely a huge part of all this, in addition to just he didn't know how to play the game. I do want to come back to his election. And I mean, Niki, this is the late 80s, early 90s. We're starting to get into your territory here in terms of mapping interesting political dynamics. And when you read about the path that he took through the primary and then to the general election, especially in the primary, I mean, it was this classic scenario where he was running against a super establishment GOP opponent, and there was a fractured field, and he put together this coalition that, was basically like, and in Arizona, it was a lot of Mormon support, but it was basically like religious conservatives, and then retirees who kind of wanted the tax breaks, but, a little economic incentive over here, a little casual racism over here, a little whatever here, and you can put together this really, viable coalition in a fractured primary. But I mean, it is clearly a path that a bunch of people, including Donald Trump, have walked.
Yes, and he also brings in members of the John Birch Society, which, if you're a member of the John Birch Society in 1986, you are a devoted member of the John Birch Society. But
it's enough of the piece of the pie.
Exactly, right? That you're able to both tap into extremist groups, you're able to use casual, and I would argue sometimes even your bow tie formal racism to bring some people in, tax cuts, like to be able to build that coalition and to go against an incumbent who doesn't see you as a threat. That makes a huge difference, because the guy that he beats ends his campaign with $1 million in the bank for a race for governor in the 1980s.
That's
like
crazy.
That's political malpractice.
We didn't. I don't think we mentioned this. The time that Mecham finally navigated this super narrow path was his 5th time running for office. So I'm sure there was a little bit of that, like, oh, this joker is here again. We don't have to take him seriously, and you don't have to take someone seriously until you have to take him seriously. But yeah.
It's because of his impeachment that they basically changed their voting laws, which said now, okay, if you don't get 50% of the vote, we need to have a runoff. And that's the thing. He gets 44% of the vote. But having that threshold, I think, requires more people to buy in or to vote, so that you don't have people who shouldn't be in elected office in elected office.
Right, that big concern about splitting the vote and trying to make sure that it's by a majority, which has been problematically used in other states. But you can see kind of the intention behind it in the reforms after this in Arizona.
So, final kind of question is, I've just been thinking about whether it should just be easier to get rid of people like this. And part of this, I'll be honest, is because I wake up every single day and I go, I cannot believe George Santos is still an elected official.
My gosh,
and that they just haven't gotten their act together. Like, if they can't figure out a way to get rid of this guy, like, what are we doing here, And so, I mean, part of it is just my personal exasperation at that. But also, like, you look at the history of governors who were impeached, and it's a lot, as you would imagine, it's a lot in like 1860s, 70s, 80s, 90s. And then it basically just stops in like the 1920s, probably around the same time we stopped, adding amendments to the Constitution and reforming voting and so forth. And then it happens like two more times. It basically happens with Mecham, and then it happens with Blagojevich. So I'm just curious, kind of like, why do you think stuff like this doesn't happen more often, and should it happen more often, to just get rid of bad actors when they're clearly unfit?
I mean, my answer is probably a little more depressing. I feel like part of it is apathy. I think part of it is that we have grown to expect this kind of behavior, be it racist or sexist or homophobic or even corrupt. We have come to expect that from politicians. And so in some ways we think it's like a part of the package. And so, we'll just wait another 2 or 3 years until they're gone and then bring in somebody else. I think it's really difficult to get people motivated to not just vote someone in, but also vote someone out.
Yeah, and the more that the other party has become increasingly demonized, it has become difficult if you're concerned about losing hold of power in the state. Because in the case of Mecham, the person who replaces him is a Democrat, the Secretary of State. And, that doesn't happen with Blagojevich. But to have a governor removed is not great for the party's image. And so I think that's part of it as well. And people have seen that they don't necessarily pay a price for consumption, that they don't necessarily pay a price for corruption, that it doesn't necessarily hurt the party or its chances. And so there's no sort of like moral outrage that overcomes that electoral advantage.
Yeah.
I mean, he doesn't go to jail. The charges, he has 6 felony charges against him. They all get dismissed. So when you think about how people like that are held to accountability, kicking them out of office is really the only sort of accountability or a consequence that they get. But interestingly enough, he runs again.
But doesn't win. No contemporary
win, but
overtones
talk about
to
relentless. He was undaunted.
Yeah. And look, I mean, as you can imagine, I don't think we scratched the surface, but we didn't certainly hit the bottom of the barrel on incidents with this guy. When half of your Wikipedia page is just under the subheadline "Other Incidents," I don't think it's the greatest sign. But yeah, so go. First off, thanks to everyone who's written in about him, and thanks for nudging us on that. And then certainly, folks, there's plenty more out there to learn about this guy and Arizona politics in the early 90s. But we will leave it there for now. Nicole Hammer, thanks to you as always.
Thanks, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
Radiotopia.
From